For 12 points, what is the function I'm thinking of that you know nothing else about? For 10 points, the function of which I am thinking today is a composite function, which is like two functions combined in some way. Like a function of a function, which is the basic definition of what is called the composite function for listeners who appreciate the notional idea of the composite function. For 9 points, this function is a one-to-one function. Not in the same way that 11 squared is a one-to-one function, but in the way that each value of y can only be made by one value of x, like a one-to-one mapping type thing applied to the functions and the function terminology. For 8 points, this function takes the value 0 when x is 5, and being a one-to-one function, it follows that x is 5 is the only value of x for which the x-axis is intersected. And it must be intersected since we have elucidated already, hence that is a one-to-one function. For 7 points, enthusiasts of functions will be overjoyed to discover this function has a range of everything, or in the language of the functions, fx, so any real numbers can be created by the use of this function. And by ER I don't mean the medical drama that George Clooney was in, and then wasn't in, and then was in for one last episode. I'm speaking the lingo of the notation of the functions. For 6 points, this function is neither odd nor even, so it fails to map onto itself when rotated 180 degrees around the origin, which is what an odd function would do, and equally it fails to map onto itself when affected in the y-axis, which is what an even function would do. It rebukes all claims to the symmetricality enjoyed by those functions which are of a proudness to proclaim themselves the odd and or the even functions. For 5 points, this function has an interesting domain. Although this function allows all sorts of real numbers, they must be larger than the number 4. So 4.1 would be fine, but 3.9 would be the opposite of fine. Even the value of the 4 itself is unacceptable. In function speak, the oral speaking of the function notation, the domain will be quoted as xer, x is a greater than 4. For 4 points, this function is the inverse of an exponential function, not e to the x itself, but some modification of e to the x. For 3 points, the result of substituting the integer 6 into this function, of which we are currently attempting to establish the relationship of between x and fx, is the natural logarithm of 2. Natural logarithms being the inverse of the exponential type of relationships from the previous clue. So, f of 6 is ln 2. For 2 points, if you're into your translations, and I'm not referring to the foreign lingos here, but the moving about kind of translating, then if you're into your translations, you would find it useful and necessary to know that the function we're talking about is a translation of ln x, which has been translated to the right along the positive x-axis. For 1 final point, the function is a translation of ln x, which has been translated by the number of 4 units to the right along the positive x-axis.